Okay, progress on the Riley. Had a fairly busy weekend. Just finished a big cleanup because the place was turning into a tip again. But I've been working on the frame a little bit more. Not the actual frame, this is just my mock-up. It's really just to test that my 3D model is correct and that the different frames, the different stations look more or less right, and that the body isn't going to interfere with anything on the car and that everything seems to fit nicely. And it's been really instructive so far. I've already had to go and tweak the model a couple of times for little differences. So for example, I discovered that with the radiator in place, this one was a little bit low. So I added a 1/4 inch height, the front of the firewall. Those seem to be the sorts of errors I'm getting. I'm down to that last 1/4 inch sort of range now, which is probably more than enough. I don't suspect these cars were built to much better tolerances than that back in the day. That's one of the things with a timber body car. The timber's going to move and it's going to twist and warp and do all sorts of strange things. But I've only sliced the model vertically so far, so it's only sliced this way. I haven't sliced it horizontally, so these straight pieces of timber in here, they're not following the curve of the body. They're going in a straight line, so this won't be straight on the car, if that makes sense. This will actually have curve to it. But it was too much to try and do all of that at once, and I'm just really checking the overall shape. So what that's let me do though is I actually made this as a full hoop, and then I put these in, and I put in these, which are effectively the door pillars. So this is the driver's door, the offside, and you can see over there the near side passenger door, and you can see how they're shorter, they're different lengths. And this door is effectively matched to that original door skin. That's the idea anyway. It's going to be pretty close to that. And this is also letting me test a few other things, like can you get your legs into the car? Because obviously the seat's very low down and you need the door there so you can actually, get in and out of the car. And it also lets me check other things like the pedal clearances. So if you imagine that timber framing there, that is actually the correct width. You can see there's actually room there. Couldn't drive it in my steel cap boots, but normal sort of driving shoes, there's plenty of room, and the pedals work really well for heel toe. So I think that's all correct. Whoops. Oh, didn't like that. There we go. This is effectively where the edge of the cockpit is, and the instrument panel sits in there. There'll be some sort of bracket to support the steering column. I actually have a proper Riley bracket for that somewhere. And what I ended up doing was just tweaking the model a little bit. I came and remeasured everything, because when you're doing that freeform modeling, you sort of shift things around till they're right, and you can actually end up shifting them beyond where they should be. And that's why I've got this sort of right angle set up at the front of the car with that piece of aluminium to give me a flat surface that I can match up to my model. So I've measured everything. I've checked all my measurements again. I marked them on the tape to make sure the frames are lying where they should be. I did have to tweak my model around the rear wheel openings. I need to check that again just to make sure there's enough clearance for the brake shafts there. This is effectively the hoop that goes on the seat back, and that fits about there. Obviously I haven't propped it up yet, but that gives you some idea of the cockpit opening. And my method of making these is working fairly well, which is printing them out full scale, gluing them to the MDF. So you glue the PDF to the MDF, and then you just cut it out. I've been cutting it out on the bandsaw, That all works pretty well. That's all working really well now, and it's pretty easy. I still haven't set up permanent extraction on my little linishing table. The other thing I still might look at doing is making something to move this down so it's actually further down here, so you've got more, because this is wasted space really, or wasted sanding area. See, my pile of offcuts is getting bigger, but it's also letting me get a good mental handle on how much timber I'm actually going to need, and if I'll be able to do it from the different planks that I'll need to buy. So it's all going to have to cut out of planks, but it's working pretty well, and I haven't really considered where I'm going to do the joins yet to avoid that short grain problem, but I'm sure that'll become more apparent. What I may end up doing is getting the templates printed out full size, or at least trying to figure out a way to glue them together, because at the moment I'm just using the default separations, which is you know, these are joined based on the size of a piece of A4 paper. So if I printed them in A3, I'd have less joins, and then I can figure out exactly where I want them to go. Because I think something like this, you can see this curve is coming around a long way. So if the grain's going this way, by the time you get to here, you've got that short grain problem. So you need to split this one up differently. You'd probably split it here or something like that. And you make it from different sections, so you've got the long grain going the right direction all the way around the frames. But that's coming along. I think I'd mounted the radiator hose inlets and outlets previously. This does all look correct. Everything looks very tight, which it actually is in real life. Obviously I can change the angle of the steering wheel a little bit, but that's more or less correct. And it's going to be interesting. I haven't actually measured how far out the tail goes. I mean, I've got it in the model. I just need to come out with a tape measure and actually see how much past that rear spring hanger does it go. I think it's to about here, somewhere like that. But that'll be really interesting. I'm actually going to do the frames all the way to the tail and extend it all the way back, so I can actually see how long the car is. I may end up having to move some of my junk here. As I mentioned, that cleanup, one of the problems I have in this shed is there's no insulation and everything rusts. So you can see the sheet metal is surface rusting, and that's with oil protection and stuff on it. I think some of that may have come off, so I should probably rub that down again. But I was cleaning up all my machines because I use those. I'll explain why I used them for in a minute. And I saw something on Quinn, Blondie Hacks. She does a lot of machining type videos, and she just did a big move, and she mentioned wiping down all her machine tools before she moved with the slideway oil. And I've got some. When I got the mill, they gave me a big bottle of it. It's sitting sort of in the base there, and I've used it to lubricate the slideways. But she mentioned that it's good for rubbing on top of the tools, on top of all the metal, because it kind of soaks in. It is kind of strange. Whoops, oil. I just tripped over my mesh. It's very goopy, and it's a bit like sort of honey. But apparently that'll also help prevent corrosion, of course, because it's an oil. But it sounds like it may be specially designed to do that, as well as lubricate. So I went around all my different little bits of metal and, you know, measuring blocks and all these things that end up getting a very light surface rust on them. And I rubbed them all down with a red Scotch-Brite and then effectively oily ragged them with that slide oil. So I'm going to see how well that works, if it works better than just normal oil. It's one of those things I just never knew. I didn't know that was one of the uses of it or one of the properties of it. But I've gone through everything, so the mill, the lathe, my drill press, the vise, the little drill vices, all sorts of things. Another thing that's pretty neat, oh, my gimbal's getting all confused, is I bought a set of the correct headlamps for the car. So these are oily now. These are proper Rotax headlamps, and you can see they've actually got the Riley badge in the middle and the spider, which is pretty neat. Obviously they're second-hand. New restored ones of these are very expensive. I think several £1,000s, I'm not sure. The glass on this one is broken, but you can get new glass from the register spares, so I need to order that. And they're not too beat up. This one's pretty smooth. This is the more battered one with the broken glass, and you can see it's got a few dents and dings and bits and pieces in it. I should be able to sort of planish all that out, hopefully. There's no rust in them. Often they rust all around the bottom. The connectors may need some work. I'm not quite sure how those are supposed to work. But the shells are painted normally, which is good because it makes it a bit easier for me to repair them. They don't have to be plated. And the fronts can probably be polished up. One of them I did just polish a little bit of one edge just to see how it would come up. Yeah, I think around there. And you can see the plating's very thin. The plating's kind of coming off, but that's okay. They'll clean up, and they'll not look new or over restored, so they should be fine to use as they are. Let's take the one that's already a bit dinged, just in case. But it's a bit hard to see without the radiator shell. But I think the way these mount is there's a sort of little oval plate that bolts on here. So it bolts onto that, and it brings the lights forward, and then the light bolts through to that. So they'll sit sort of there somewhere. It's a bit hard to really see what they're going to look like, but these should be good, I think. I'm not sure what state the reflectors are in. If I need to get them re-silvered, if I can find someone who can still do that. I believe there is a place not too far away from us, actually. I'll have to see, but they might be okay. And then bulbs, I'll probably look at sorting out LED bulbs for them, I guess. But yeah, hopefully they'll come up really nicely. So it's the first time I've bought anything through the pre-war car site, so it was a little bit nerve-wracking at first, just trying to making sure things aren't scams and if they were actually going to turn up. But no, the chap I got them from was really nice. He sorted out packaging them for me, packaged them really, really well, so there was no danger of them getting damaged, and I had them insured and stuff as well anyway. So that's really cool because I've never seen any of these for sale in New Zealand. I've kept an eye out for things like that for years, but those were good. And finally, the radiator shell. This is what I've been working on all weekend, and it's pretty much finished now. So there were a few interesting things on it. One is this strip, which is what the bonnet lacing, it sort of loops through it. That's why it's got these slots in it. And this strip is, I think it's 1/16, so about 1.5, 1.6 mil steel, and it's got a lip on it, and it's sort of soldered all the way around. I soft soldered it. And making that was interesting, because it's all a single piece. I couldn't just fold up some steel because, one, I don't have any. I didn't want to buy a whole sheet just to make a thin strip. And two, my folder's not long enough. Obviously, I could have farmed it out to someone and paid someone to do it and then waited for them to do it. But I figured out a way I could do it myself. And what I ended up doing is I bought some square section galvanized tube, which is 1.6 millimeter wall thickness, and it was 20 mil square. And I sliced that with an angle grinder. Used up quite a few, even though it's easy to cut, but I went through about 3 or 4 of the little thin angle grinding cutting discs on that, and I sliced out half of it effectively. I tried to cut close to the corner. Then what I had to do was tidy up those edges on the mill, and that was a bit of a mission, because someone who's a real machinist may know a good way to clamp something like that down so you can use the full length of the full travel off the bed. What I ended up doing was rigging it up so I had spacers and things in the vise and a little spacer out here to support the end of the bar, and I basically just had to keep sliding along in the vise and milling the edges off it bit by bit. So I would mill a short length like that so it wasn't flapping around, and then I'd have to stop and reposition the metal. But because I had everything set up with guides and things, it was easy enough to just kind of slide it, and by doing that I was able to sort of mill both edges off it to get it nice and square. And then the slots, on the originals, these are punched because they've got square corners, but again I was just able to set it up in the mill, and I used a little end milling cutter, and I just milled the slots out. This is an extra little piece that's just welded on. This is, I think, where the front of the bonnet attaches. So that came out really well. And what I did when I made this is I actually drew a template. I hope it's the cardboard that my lamps are sitting on, to make sure, one, that it was symmetrical, and two, it matches an original, because this lip is where the front of the bonnet sits. So the shape of this is correct because it's based off an original radiator, so that should be good. Like I say, it's all silver soldered on, and then this bit was just TIG welded, a little extra piece. I left a little bit of the edge on it just to make that stiffer, because that's where the bonnet bolts down, so you don't want that flapping around. The filler cap, or the fake filler cap, this was tricky because I couldn't, again, easily get a piece of metal tube or pipe the right sort of diameter. What I ended up using was, it's a galvanized pipe socket, 2-inch. This is the original thread on it. This is half of it because I ended up machining it out of this, basically. It's cast steel, so it machines easily, but it's not nice steel. But that's all right. It came out okay, and I cut the correct thread for the filler caps on the lathe as well. This size thread, I think that's getting to the limit of my little lathe. It really struggled with it. I had to take very, very light cuts. I think the problem is that this ends up, it's almost like this thread overpowers the thread on the lathe. So it may have been my setup, maybe I didn't have the angle on the tool quite right or something like that, but it's just towards the end it started feeling like it was pulling it a little bit, if that makes sense. But I got there in the end. I got the thread cut. It's just a 12 TPI thread, and that's all silver soldered in place. I just noticed I missed a little bit at the back there, but it doesn't matter. It just has to hold it. It doesn't have to seal it, because this is obviously not a wet shell. I think I'd mentioned before I soldered on these little bosses on the inside. Sort of see one there and one up there, and they have a dual purpose. One is to hold the mesh in from the back, and then I'm going to make the screws oversize so that the thread actually comes through the front. And then when I make the stone guard, which will be next, I can use little acorn nuts on the outside of it to hold the stone guard in place. So they'll kind of go on there to keep it all neat. And the other problem I had was, you might notice this corner is a slightly different color. That's because you might remember I'd made this and it was actually a little bit lopsided. This corner was too high. So I cut a pie slice out of it, shunted it down, re-welded it, and managed to make it a little bit too short. So just this corner didn't stick out enough. So since this thing's kind of an experiment anyway, I'm just messing around with it. I used some lead on that. And this is lead that was left over from when I restored my MGB. So 10 years ago now, or something like that. Long time ago, anyway. And I went and found the little leftover dregs off the body solder I had. So these were all the bits that were left over from the MG, and you can see they're just little end pieces. So I had just enough to do it. You can still buy the body solder. That's not too bad. It's not too expensive. But luckily, I still have a lot of the solder paste. So I looked up how much this stuff costs now, and a jar exactly like this is, the price varies. I've seen it for, the cheapest I've seen it for is 250 New Zealand dollars. But I've also seen it up to about 350 New Zealand dollars just for that. So when the radiator people, all the radiator makers I spoke to, were talking about the cost, and they were saying to me, yeah, the costs have gone through the roof in the last few years because the cost of all the materials has gone up, and solder was one of the examples they used. Was that the price, I guess it's the price of the lead or the price of the tin, has gone through the roof. So, they're paying 3-4 times as much for just some of the raw materials that they need to make things. So I'm glad I've still got that, because that would have been painful having to pay that much. But the other thing I found when I was leading it, it's been a while since I've done it, so I'm pretty rusty, and I was never that good at it in the first place, because like I say, my only example is the MGB. But I was using the little handheld gas torch thing with those propane tanks, both of which are now empty, I think. And because I ran out of propane, I had to rely on my oxyacetylene, and I'm almost out of acetylene as well, of course, because you always run out of everything just when you need it. But I actually found with a very soft acetylene flame, it was much easier, because you can get way more heat in. Everything happens faster, so you have to be really careful with the heat. But, you can hold the torch a long way back and get the whole thing up to temperature, nicely up to temperature, and work the lead. So that came up really well. I've filed it all smooth. You're not really supposed to sand the stuff because you don't want the lead dust in the atmosphere. But I did, just after I'd filed it, gave it a quick run over with the random orbit sander, and just made sure I collected all the dust and wore a mask. And it's one of the reasons I had a really good cleanup after I finished, just to get rid of all that stuff. The shell was pickled in boiling water and citric acid to get rid of all the soft solder flux. And then I cleaned all of that off. It's had a soak in a phosphoric acid bath overnight just to get into all the nooks and crannies. And I went over the whole thing with steel wool, scrubbed it as clean as I could absolutely get it. Washed all that off with lots and lots of just fresh water, and then dried it off with compressed air. That's the only way you can really dry it off, because you can do it without touching it, and it dries it really fast, which is essential, because otherwise it just flash rusts. And I'm not sure if you can see it. It's been sitting a couple of hours, and it's already got a very slight orange tinge on it, which is just the flash rust, the surface rust, that just happens immediately for some reason. And it's not even that humid at the moment. We're only just almost starting to go into spring. So the next plan on this is I'm going to paint it with some zinc-rich paint for now. I don't think this one's good enough to go and get it plated. I'm not sure you can plate it now it's been soldered. I think maybe you can. I think that's how they repair the pits in the soldering. When they do plating, I'd have to look into that. But I think I would want to make one out of brass if I was actually going to have it nickel plated. So for now, I'm just going to give it a coat of paint so it doesn't rust, basically, and leave it at that, and then I'll come back to it later. But it came out okay. It's not perfect, but it's better than the one that was originally on 8075, which I couldn't reuse that because it's the wrong size, and it's so dented up. and I'm not even sure the core in that is good. So if the core on it is not good, you'd have to strip it all out anyway to rebuild it. So that's where I'm at. I'll probably paint this now, and I'm going to leave it for a few days before I do much more with it. I still need to look at the stone guard mesh. So that's the mesh there. One thing I've been trying to work out is originally which way did the mesh go? Was it vertical or diagonal? I've got period pictures of it both ways pretty much, but a lot of the race cars seem to have it going up and down, so it's actually that way around. And the other thing is they didn't use this sort of modern crimped style wire. It's more a loose sort of mesh, but I'm going to use this anyway because that's what I've got, and I haven't found any of the other kind that I can get easily or cheaply. Nothing's cheap at the moment, so I'm just going to reuse what I've got. And that's the mesh that'll go on the inside. So I think now's probably a good time to paint that before it has a chance to rust anymore. And I will keep working on these frames. These frames are quite good because it's the sort of thing I can print out during the day, and then in the evening I can come out and just have a little bit of shed time and glue up one of them, and cut it out and put it together. So, it's a good after work thing to do. I realized I've got my order of operations wrong. I've sprayed the inside of the shell with the special anti-corrosion paint, and then I was going to cut out the next bit of framing and realized putting sawdust in the air after I've just painted something is probably a really dumb idea, so I'm going to leave that till tomorrow, I think. But I thought I'd have a quick look at these lamps and have a look at how hard it's going to be to repair them. And somebody's obviously been into them before or tried to get into them. I don't think this one's too bad, but yeah, you can sort of see here where someone's tried to prise it apart, and here, that wasn't me. There's a single screw that holds these, and it occurred to me, well, these things are normally clipped on or sort of bayonet fitted on, so that screw just stops it coming undone. So, they don't prise off the front, they don't pop off the front. So what I ended up doing is setting one up in the vise, clamping it upright. I took the screw out and then just tried jiggling it around or rotating it. I used a little bit of sort of lubricant around the edge because these are pretty old. That's why this one's a bit wet. Just to help penetrate through and break any rust or anything. And yes, they do rotate off, so it's pretty easy to get them off. You just sort of rotate the shell, and you can see the little sort of bayonet things. This is where they sort of clip on, and there's a little pin there to stop them. So that's actually springing, I think. So I was able to get it apart. This is the one with the broken glass. I'm not quite sure. There seems to be they're sort of rolled over, so that is going to be interesting to see how you actually replace that glass. I need to get this out, but at least now I can measure it and I know what diameter glass I need to order from the spares. It's kind of stippled, probably just see, except for the little center bit where you can see the Riley badge. The reflectors don't look too bad. I'm not going to touch them because that's meant to be bad for them, so I'm being very careful not to get fingers on them. It's just a single bulb holder and a little sort of fitting there, and it turns out these are actually connectors, and they were round the wrong way. So this one has a single pin. I'm wondering if you can get these. The other one has doubles, and the bulb that was in this first one is just a single filament bulb. It's a 12 volt 48 watt bulb. No idea if that's correct or not. I did manage to get out the little Rotax badge. That one's a bit beat up, but doesn't like focusing. It may be possible to fix that one. This one looks corroded, I guess, but I think those are, I can't tell if those are holes. Yeah, they're little holes in it. So once I pop this one apart, I'll see what I can do about that badge. It might be possible to get replacement ones of those, I'm not sure. If not, I'll just clean it up the best I can and seal the back of it with some epoxy. But at least now with the shells apart, I can tidy up these edges. That just needs a little bit of hammering. If I can figure out how you get this glass in and out, if it's rolled, that's going to be a real pain in the neck. I don't know if this... It almost looks like it could be a separate piece sort of pushed on. I don't know if it's then glued on or how that works, but I think I'll take apart the other one, but at least you can see there's just a little bit of surface rust forming, but this is really good. And now that I can get inside it, I can, you know, like down in there, hopefully I can planish out the dents, the worst of the dents on this anyway. It doesn't look too bad on camera, but it's pretty lumpy. So I'll get the other one apart. I might put those reflectors somewhere so they're safe face down. I don't know if there's anything you can actually sensibly clean those with. I know the silvering's really delicate. If it's anything like telescope mirrors, you can actually clean them with water. You use distilled water and nothing abrasive at all is the rule, I think. So I'll have to look into that and see what the story is there. If those need to be resilvered, it looks like I can get the little spider is, oh no, it's screwed on. I thought it might be riveted on, but no, there are little screws there. So it may actually be possible to get those resilvered. I can take the spiders off and clean those up. But yeah, it's quite nice there with the little Riley badge. My gimbal battery went flat, so this is just handheld, but I took apart the second lamp and noticed that this one's a little bit different. You can sort of see it's got a slightly smaller internal reflector. Wow, that's interesting. I wonder what that means. And I managed to get it out and I realized, it's a dipping headlight. So that was kind of an unexpected surprise. That also explains why one of the lamps had a 2-pin connector and the other one only had a single pin connector. And what this is normally these headlamps are fixed. They've only got the single filament. There's not high beam, low beam. And so the way they got around that was they had one headlight that dipped and it physically moves the bulb. So the mechanism, I don't know if it works when it's powered up. I haven't looked at that yet. I'll measure everything first. But the way this works is this internal reflector pivots, and this down here is just a big electromagnet, and you can sort of manually operate it. I think that return spring has probably gone a little bit weak, but basically you can see the electromagnet there, and there's a big plunger on it, and effectively that changes the position of the bulb. I'm guessing this would have gone on the off side of the car, the one closer to the center line of the road. And when it's dipped, you just dip it and it just moves the beam down, or in rather, because if the badge is the correct way up, which it was, it kind of moves on an angle. It doesn't go up and down. It kind of goes in towards the middle, I guess is the way to put it. So if that goes up like that, it's a bit tricky to do with one hand, But if you imagine the cars going down the road that way, it looks like when you change the dip position, it sort of angles the beam. Instead of going straight, it goes like that, which is interesting. I've never seen one before. I've heard of them before, and I've never actually seen a picture of one before, to be honest. But I mean, it's a pretty simple mechanism. If that electromagnet works, there's no reason why all that won't work when it's all cleaned up. So that was very cool. The other little badge was corroded through, so I'll have to see if you can actually buy those Rotax badges. There is a company in the UK, I think they're called Genius of the Lamp. They restore things like that, so I can probably find out if they've got something that'll work